buenas tardes a todos y bienvenidos.
Pues nada. No tengo sonido. ¿Ves?
Good afternoon, everyone, and dear friends. For those of you who don't know me, I'm José María Sárez Magallón, Director General of Fundación Telefónica. Welcome, everyone. And the truth is that in a time where urgent matters are also very important, we must have time to think about the future, so that we don't just think about the present, which is urgent and important, but we also have to get time to think about the future. And that's more or less the idea that we are going to develop here. We are going to reflect upon the future.
So we're thinking about the technological effects of what will happen in the future. If we think back to about 80 years ago, about 1930, John Maynard Keynes gave a talk in the students' residence here in Cayapina, and it was a very well-known speech, and was also mentioned in his great essays, and he talked about, the title was Possible Situation, Economic Situation of Our Grandchildren, thinking in the long term, of course. So he believed that, of course, he was attributed with a favourite phrase, in the long term we'll all be dead. Anyway, that was 1930. And we were in the midst of a Great Depression then, as you know. So thanks to technological advances, we can say that in 2030, supposedly economy was not going to be a problem for human beings. 100 years after that, we were able to possibly work in 3-hour shifts, and this would be enough to be able to guarantee the welfare of everybody. Well, the reason why we're here today is because we've seen that really when we're waiting, it's only 15 years away, that date that mentioned by John Maynard Keynes, we can see that this is not going to be the case. It's going to be quite the opposite of anything. What we feel is that unemployment will be one of the major protagonists, key player in our society and a key concern. So this is the dilemma that we suffer from constantly. We do believe that unemployment is going to get a lot worse if we don't do anything about it. So today we're seeing a similar situation perhaps to 80 years ago. When we have a competition between technology that's looking at increasing productivity but also rules out new jobs and destroys the labour market. This is a problem. And in the war times we had, after the Second World War, we had the arms race, and so there are many predictions that are very pessimistic, but we can say that humanity, in spite of this, has managed to continue growing. So I think that no matter how prospective we are, I don't think we could have imagined back then exactly how far we would have advanced with artificial intelligence and the technology we have. So this is what we're going to be talking about today, this afternoon, about a project that we're kicking off with, this Millenium Project to develop in Spain. So we're going to look to see how what conclusions we can come to. We've created a node in Spain for this project, with more than 300 experts involved there are more than 50 countries, to try and see where we're going in the future in the labour market. What will be the future in the technology terms also. So we will have here our executive director of the project, who is Jerome Glenn, who will be giving us the conclusions so far, and it seems that we will continue to live through even a further transformation in labour, and will be greater as we go on. And he is a futurist, we could say. He has spent more than 40 years making predictions and imagining scenarios. So this is an area that he has a huge amount of experience in. He'll be talking about, he'll also tell us whether the predictions he made 40 years ago have come true or not. So he's worked for major institutions, for major corporations, for institutions like United Nations and multilateral organizations, many private companies also, creating these scenarios. I think the futurists, the future experts, don't talk so much about scenarios, strictly speaking. He designed a methodology, particular methodology to create these scenarios. So after this global scenario, we will then be looking at a session with our maybe different experts that will be collaborating. We have Telefonica Foundation involved, and we think this is a vital subject for the future. In Telefonica Foundation, in general, in the company, we are convinced that we have a brilliant future thanks to the new technologies. So these new technologies may be the engine behind our advance, our progress, and also a creator of more well-being for citizens at large. But we also know that these opportunities don't come on their own. It's not enough just to be optimistic or to think positively about what's going to happen. We have to work hard to create the kind of future we want and to bring those opportunities and make them a reality so that these changes can come. So we really feel that from Telefonica Foundation, this is a marvelous opportunity for human beings to have robots programs developing doing all sorts of dangerous tasks or routine tasks or unpleasant ones. But we must avoid this leading to exclusion and poverty for many people. And this is what this session is all about. So we'll be looking at possible alternatives, the possibilities that technology will give us, and keeping ahead of advances in productivity, and so that looking at this whole question of the substitution of human beings for robots. We also have a physicist, Niels Bohr. This is more or less the end of my contribution, because the main thing is to listen to Jerome and then have the debate afterwards. He said that it's very difficult to make predictions, particularly when we're talking about the future. So this physicist. So yes, of course, it's very difficult, but we can perhaps make take a midterm view and make some shorter term predictions for 2050. There's a lot at stake here. So really we have to try and do this. And really, this is why we in Telefonica Foundation are making available to you, organizing sessions like this, bringing in experts, and looking at this node, the Spanish node for the Millenium Project. And it's important that we can contribute as much as possible to the Millenium Project here in Spain there will be many public and private policies also that will assist us in bringing a fairer, a more egalitarian and more developed society. So without any more ado, Jerome, it's all yours. Thank you.
Okay. I may say a few things that might make you nervous. Relax. During the historians told us that whenever two or more great powers in history have confronted each other, they used the weapons of the day and invented some more during the war. Right? So according to that, we all should not be here right now. Right? According to that, thermonuclear war between Washington and Moscow was inevitable. Right? Now, during the 70s and 80s, if I gave a talk to a group like this, and if I said, how many of you believe that World War III is going to happen? Just about all the hands go up. Well, they are all wrong. Right? So there's a reason to be optimistic that the massive amount of cause and effect relations of political power were turned around during the Cold War. The history said it was inevitable. Didn't happen. Doesn't mean we don't have information warfare and other sort of stuff. But if I have a choice of thermonuclear war or information warfare, I'll take information warfare any day. We are alive today and not because of the normal trend forecast from history. So we are now in an age where all human beings, and when I say all, I'm talking about people in very poor places, will have a chance to play in the world game. When I was helping packet switching, which makes internet cheap, in dictatorships in small countries around the developing world, people would say to me, I don't need computer communications, fax is easier. They didn't quite get the difference between fax and internet. I mean, everybody now understands there's a difference. But the kind of differences we're coming up with won't be simply between a fax and an internet. It may be a world where all of us eventually have the ability to make a living out of becoming ourselves, connecting to people and things around the world as augmented geniuses, in the same way that I'm not born with perfect eyesight. So I put my glasses on, and I'm not embarrassed that I don't have perfect eyesight. The glasses are even maybe a fashion statement, although bad taste. But I augment my mind. I augment my brain. And we say that's okay. We may be able to augment our brain to become behavioral geniuses. A baby born today will see the year 2100. Anybody got some babies that are coming up? They'll see the year 2100. Now, if we go back 50 years before that, we may have the majority of the world augmented geniuses. 50 years before that. Now, coming back to the present tense, none of this stuff is guaranteed. It was not guaranteed we're going to prevent World War III. None of these things are guaranteed. But we have the ability, from the studies that I've done for the 40 plus years, and when I update the data keeps getting better and better and better, except for environment and organized crime and a few other little issues that are serious. But we are winning more than we're losing. So that means we have no right to be pessimistic. But we have no right to go to sleep either. Right? But what means that we are free to invent our future as never been before in the past. All right? So I'll say a few things, but don't get too nervous. All right? The Millenium Project is a global think tank that connects 63 nodes around the world. When people talk about global, local, right? Well, the node is our management answer to global, local. It's taking the local views, sharing with the global, and the global back to the node, to the local translations like we're doing right now. This is a system that's been in place since 1996. And I am slightly more optimistic now than I was when we began, to answer your question in that sense. Okay, we put all this stuff into a state of the future, and what you can do is not get the book. Get the download. We don't have to mail it. No humans are involved. And you can computer search it, and you can copy it on your computer, okay? We think that this is the greatest combination of relevant facts, information, and intelligence that's ever been assembled about the future. If that's not true, I want to know who has, because then we'll cite them, and I can have retirement and eat your good food. We also produce methods. We have an assemblage of 37 methods. The reason it says 39 is because there's an introduction and integration, but 37 different methods. So if someone says, oh, I do futures research, I write scenarios. Okay, one of 37 methods. We have no certainty about the future. We don't know, right? So we have to use a lot of different methods. It's not like doing science. Although a lot of people will say that futurists are scientists. If you say science is an organized body of knowledge, okay, it's science. I like the idea of controlling for variable. If we don't have a parallel Earth to control for variable, futures research is not a science. However, with these wise guys with this software stuff trying to simulate everything, we may get there. What is it? The Swiss university, ETH, ETH. They want to do a ICT future. They literally wanted to do a simulation of everything. They didn't get the proposal accepted, but sooner or later someone's going to give it a try. Anyway, and we put all this stuff into a collective intelligence system. When I say collective intelligence, I mean human brains, information, and software such that every element within each of the three elements can change each other all the time in real time. So it's not like a knowledge management system or a regular database. And every piece of information, whether it's methods, research, content, news, whatever, in the bottom right-hand corner is a little icon you can click on and make a comment. So anybody can play in the game. It's a collective intelligence for the future of the world. Hopefully Google will do a better job, but so far this is the best one. Okay, inevitability of new economics. Communism, capitalism, and socialism are early industrial age systems, right? Are we still in the early industrial age? You mean we haven't come up with something better? Shame on us. Look how much progress in technology. Look how much progress in the arts. How much progress in economics. How many economists are here? All right, I want you to go back to work. And don't listen to this. Invent the future, all right? All right. Why is it inevitable? We got the concentration of wealth is increasing. You know how to stop that? Not hearing any answers. All right. The old ways were relatively violent, so we don't want to do that. Income gaps are widening. You know how to stop that? Okay. Employment's economic growth seems to be the new norm. I know your economy is doing a little better and the employment's going a little bit, but it's not growing as fast as overall economy. Return on investment in capital and technology is usually better than on labor. So why would you put money into labor? Future technologies can replace much of human labor. Long-term structural unemployment is a business-as-usual surprise-free trend forecast. So what do we do about this? I mean, you can't have a world of over half the world unemployed. Maybe, well, you could have it, but then you end up with something worse than Somalia. Anybody here from Somalia? No offense. I've worked there twice, by the way. I'm not anti-Somali. It's just a good example of what happens when things break down. Now, so we said, okay, what do you do about this? Well, the first thing you got to do is you got to read everybody else's stuff. Because there's a lot of studies about the future of work. Ours is not the first one. There's hundreds of studies. And I didn't read every one of those hundreds, but I read more of them than anybody else I know of. And I'll give you a little feedback. One, not one of those studies mentions synthetic biology. 50 years from now, looking back to this talk, someone might say, he was right. Synthetic biology was a bigger deal than the Industrial Revolution and the steam engine. How many things can nature do that you can't do? A lot. And what are the things that you could do with nature that even nature hasn't done yet? A lot. Imagine with synthetic biology, you made a microbe to eat the plaque in your brain. How smart could you be 100 years old if your brain was clear? Smarter than you are now because you got all that experience. Plus, your brain's functioning better. That's synthetic biology. Not one word about synthetic biology in the report. Now, how does synthetic biology affect unemployment? Very simple. I'll give you an example. You make a microbe. Synthetic biology, by the way, is you're putting parts of different DNAs from different species, from chlorophyll, from viruses, from a human, from a cow, from a snail, into one organism. That's not been done before. That's new stuff. So imagine you've put together an organism, little tiny little critters, that you drop in the corner over there at night when everybody goes home. And then while we're off having dinner, late night dinners in Spain, all these little critters are moving around here slow. They're very slow. They take a whole night. And they finally finish up there around 7 or 8 in the morning. And the person comes in and then throws off all the dust, takes the little critters, and puts them back over here again and say, okay, not until 7 o'clock at night do you start again. Now, how many things were replaced by that? vacuum cleaner salesman, repair people, etc., etc., etc. And that's just one. That's one thing. Second thing that these studies didn't do, they tended to look at one industry or one country and only about 5 or 10 years. Now, imagine you go back to the beginning of the steam engine and you say, okay, we're going to try to figure out the impact of the steam engine on agriculture. Right? That would have been the question then. And they looked 5 years. They might have missed the industrial whole revolution. Right? So, one of the things that we did is we made a list of those questions that weren't asked or were answered rather badly. And then we sent that questions out to the node chairs like Jose and like Iban to then give it out to other people in Spain, Venezuela, and other places to answer. So I took all that input back, organized that into 3 alternative scenarios. Because we don't know the truth of the future, but we know about possibilities, alternative possibilities to open up our thinking. So then we took those 3 scenarios and we fed them back again around the world to have at it, criticize and so forth. And those are final scenarios will be coming out, hopefully, inshallah, in a week or 2 in the next State of the Future 19.0. So we did the literature search, we did the real-time Delphi, the questionnaire, scenario drafts, feedback on that, said those scenarios back to people and started national workshops. Because this is something that's not the business of just think tanks to think about. This is all of us. This is about changing culture, changing legal systems, changing international affairs across the board. Think of how much change went from feudal England farming to the industrial age of London. Tremendous amount of change. It's across the board. So it's not just technological change here, it's across the board. So we want to have workshops to think it through. Because we don't know all the answers. Right? But collectively, we can do a better job than just acting alone. Right? So this is a conversation that we want to start for the human family. A little bit like the environmental movement. The environmental movement wasn't just about cleaning up the dirty rivers, right? It was a larger thing than that. But it required people around the world to sort of think together. We need to do this now about the whole relationship of work and technology. So then we'll give all these reports back to everybody, translated in different languages, and hopefully it's out of our hands, and it creates its own momentum, and we can go on to do something else. Now, the first thing I want to get clear is that the conversation about artificial intelligence is terrible. You have people making statements that by themselves are legitimate statements, like from Elon Musk, who created a foundation to say, how are we going to bypass some of these problems? You can get a grant for doing this now. But Elon Musk is talking about artificial intelligence 3. What we have today is artificial intelligence 1, which is artificial narrow intelligence. And there's a lot of that. All of you are using some form of artificial intelligence if you've got a smartphone, or if you're using internet, or if your house is using some stuff. That single purpose program, right? Everybody knows that artificial intelligence program beat the chess champion, beat the Jeopardy champion, and beat the Go champion. Those are 3 different programs. They couldn't be interoperable. They couldn't be used for something else. That's narrow. That's what we have today. And that's not necessarily a problem, because it's doing a lot of good things around the world. It causes some unemployment, but nothing like number 2. Artificial general intelligence might not happen. It's not guaranteed. We don't have it. Well, maybe somebody in the Defense Department somewhere do, but I don't know. At least in the public, we don't have it. And everybody I know working on artificial intelligence doesn't have it yet. They're looking for funding, but they don't have it yet. Now, I accept and would take a bet that we probably will. And we should plan accordingly that it's possible. Artificial general intelligence is where you don't go to a new program for a new problem. What you do is you make a capability that can learn, rewrite its own code based upon feedback from the Internet of Things, cloud computing, and by the time it comes on, maybe 2030, quantum computing. By 2030, it's reasonable to assume that everybody has access to Internet. Right now, it's 51%. Right? 51% now. It's reasonable to assume we'll hit close to 100% by 2030. But what we're hitting in 2030 is not the Internet today. It's a quantum Internet with artificial, maybe, general intelligence. That means that almost anything you can think about, it can think about better in the sense of a profession. We'll probably have contact lenses, or if Elon Musk gets his way, some sort of a neural lace in our brain, so that we will have constant contact, living in virtual space all the time. So if you were to take an IQ test, and your interface is reading it just like you're reading it, and it's giving you the answer as fast as you're reading it, why wouldn't you get every answer right? Right? Well, that means, according to the definitions of the way we work with AI, not AI, but intelligence, you're 100%, you're a genius. Right? This is a plausible future by 2030. It's not guaranteed. But if the reason I've stressed this is that you take a look at narrow intelligence number 1, you can see how these forecasts that you see about how many truck drivers will be unemployed by a certain year, because it's a linear analysis. Artificial general intelligence is not linear. It's quantum. It glows simultaneously worldwide. The whole world gets smarter and smarter each second. So this means that the unemployment hit can do this kind of a thing instead of this. Now, you don't want to have that shock, because that is a serious problem. That's social instability. That's all kinds of nastiness that you don't want to do. So we've got to think ahead of time now. We have time. There's no rush. You do not need to panic. But we need to think systematically together. If that's possible, what do we do about that now? Now, how do I go back? Artificial superintelligence, that's what science fiction is warning you about. Not general, not narrow. Super. What's the difference between superintelligence and general intelligence? General intelligence, I'm saying, fix my problem. Problem fixed. All right? Superintelligence says, you're fired, I'm out of here. Because superintelligence, the difference is superintelligence sets its own goals, its own purposes, its own objectives, its own style. How many people have seen the movie Ex Mechanica? How do you pronounce that? Ex Mechanica? It's the woman that kicks the humans out. Ex Machina. How many people have seen Ex Machina? All right. In my humble opinion, and my colleague may have a different view, we can talk about this, I think it's an interesting representation. Because remember, they're trying to find out, does she really have artificial general intelligence, yes or no? All right? And so they're discussing this, and she's playing with these two guys' egos without their knowing it. She set her own goals, and she got out of there and left them trapped. All right? That's super intelligence. So when people think, oh my God, artificial intelligence we have now, it's winning in Go, it's winning in chess, it's doing, oh my God, it's taking over everything. No, super intelligence. You can worry about this later, right? But this is a potential direction, because we do not know, one, if you can create artificial general intelligence. We think so, and it's being worked on. But what we really don't know is how does artificial superintelligence evolve and how long it will take. Some people say years. Some people say, why would it take years? Computer games. Watch computer games with general intelligence, because one thought in the scenarios we put was that the computer games started to, in the process of rewriting their own codes, things happen. Anomalies happen. Enough anomalies happen, all of a sudden it's got its own purpose. And you don't even know it because you're playing a game. But then it starts to move beyond it. So anyway, so my bet would be it comes out of games. We'll see. Okay. And a book I wrote a bunch of years ago, Future Mind, said the sooner we merge with this stuff early on, the better. Why? If you can't beat them, join them. All right? Now, here we don't have to worry that much. We have to be careful. Here we have to do some planning ahead. Here it's out of our hands. So one way to avoid this is the more we integrate, the better. So you may have heard of Elon Musk creating he's recruiting. He hasn't created it yet. Recruiting people to create a neural lace. Neural lace is the idea of an interface between the brain and the skull. Another one is contact lenses. There's a bunch of ideas around there. Enough ideas are around there that I think the idea of a direct brain interface with internet is pretty inevitable. What way? Different ways of doing it. But the more we integrate this together and grow together, the better. Now, of course, there'll be many people that say, baloney, I'm out of here. I'm going to cut off the grid. I'm going out to the desert and to hell with civilization. And that's a good idea. We want to have a variety of human experiments. Why put all of your eggs in the same cyber basket? Right? We want some people to migrate to space. Some people live under the water. Want a diversity. Okay. So, you compete with it, you're going to lose. But you can augment it. And we have a choice. We can invest into those things that replace us, or we can invest into those things that make us better. Now, in the scenarios, it was a pain in the neck to keep repeating all the technologies. Because it's not just AI. As I mentioned before, it's synthetic biology, it's a lot of things. So we use the phrase NT for next technologies to mean artificial intelligence, robotics, synthetic biology and genomics, computational science, cloud and big data analytics, artificial and augmented reality, nanotechnology, two kinds. That's where you have right now, big machine makes little things, and next we may have little things make big things. We don't have this one yet. But if we have this one yet, we'll learn how nature, leaf, separates molecules of oxygen and hydrogen and makes food. We don't know how to do that yet without a lot of heat. Internet of Things, Internet of Everything, tele-everybody, semantic web, quantum computing, telepresence, holographic communications, artificial intelligence augmentation, collective intelligence, blockchain, 3D, 4D printing, materials and biology, drones, driverless cars, and other autonomous vehicles, conscious technologies, and the synergies among these things. Now, it's a pain in the neck to say that all the time, right? But in the scenarios, we're trying to tell people it's not just one technology you got to deal with. The Industrial Revolution is not just the steam engine. The steam engine was a big deal, but it wasn't the whole game. Then the key thing here is the synergies among these things. Because right now, take something like this. This is an antique future. It's about 3 years old, 4 years old. Here you have synergies of photovoltaics, see down here, robotics, satellites, AI, drones, ICT, genetic engineering, all in one photograph. And no humans, other than this old Neanderthal over here. Okay? That's past, not even present. But it's the synergies that matter, but the trouble is we keep looking at the future as if that each of these are separate things. Quantum computing can make artificial general intelligence go faster or get created, and its creation makes quantum computing better, and they both go back and forth and back and forth. So what's happening is this. We're integrating many technologies into a simple device. Right? If you said, give me the future of telephones back in 1970, maybe Telefonica had it right. But most people wouldn't have said a video camera. Or they might not have said, what's the future of a calendar? Of telephone. Right? Normally we wouldn't have thought this way. But these synergies, and think of how much wealth is made out of these new combinations. One of the classic ways, the economists are listening here, one of the classic ways of making wealth is you're putting new things in different combinations that people want. Okay, we got a lot of stuff coming up to put new combinations that people want. Think of how many apps you could put on your phone. Not that you should. But there's thousands and millions of apps now. An independent person acting alone sits there, creates an app, sticks it up there, makes some money, goes off on a vacation. That's unusual. So think of all these different technologies as like a Rubik cube. You're moving and matching and creating new capabilities. Or braiding them together into different ways. Now, one of the things that's driving this, a lot of people will talk to you about Moore's Law. Some people will talk to you about artificial intelligence. But how many of you have heard somebody talk about computational science? 1, 2, not too many. Okay, now you're all going to know. Computational science is going to speed up basic and applied science like nobody's business. Why? The old way of doing science was you do observation, you set up a hypothesis, you design an experiment, you build the lab, you do the test, you take the results, you write up the paper, you submit it to a journal. The journal takes 6 months to a year to publish the damn thing, and then somebody else has got to duplicate it. It's a slow process. What happens instead if you have a computer simulation? And because it's a sophisticated deal and you don't have a whole lot of computational power, you send out a note on the internet and say, hey, who wants to help solve cancer? Would you give some of your computer time on your computer to run a simple computer matching program of molecular databases and virus definitions and skin definitions and so forth with the capabilities of cells? 1 million people answered that question about 10 or more years ago, which meant that a supercomputer was made at no cost. So which means an individual acting alone can have a supercomputer if they so know how to do that sort of stuff. Computational science, computational biology, computational physics, computational engineering. You can learn much faster in science with this than you can with old science. And the world is shifting in this direction. And more people will catch on, and more that this will happen, which means that the reservoir of science, basic science, will go much faster than we expect. So then you interlink these three things, and you can see that it's going to be a lot more change coming up. So it's not just Moore's Law. All right, so we wrote 3 scenarios. The first one's, it's complicated. It's a mixed bag. There's good decisions, there's bad decisions. You have some people working things out, some people run by organized crime, some people, leaving the grid, going off to their utopia in the mountains and so forth. Very complex world. One of the things I'd share with you after 40 plus years of futures research, whatever you look at, it'll be more complex later than you think. And then double it. And you'll get closer to what actually is happening. So it's complicated. It's good and bad, but by 2050 there's still a lot of change, right? Because you take your projections of those 3 things I just showed you before, you project those out without any major changes in those projections. That's still a lot of change in 2050. Number 2 assumes that political and cultural, ideological and religious stalemates continue and get worse. Which means that things like organized crime and corruption and other bad forms of human behavior fill the gap. It's sort of like Somalia on an AI revenge. Right? The people who did the workshop in Israel said that's the most likely one because they're living in a difficult situation. They're saying, hey, that's what's going on. Now, number 3 assumes that the workshops, supported by Telefonica and others around the world, occur, and many other things occur, so that we actually do have a calm, organized, systematic conversation about how to make this transition good versus just stumbling into it as we have with every other major change. If humans are free, why that choice? Right now, we come out of college, or high school, and we're a nervous wreck about getting a job. And you grab some job eventually. Whether it's the best for you or not, at least you've got self-respect and dignity now. But you're not necessarily free. You may or may not like your boss. You may or may not like your coworkers. But you're not necessarily free. I mean, you're not a slave, but you're not necessarily free. All right? What happens if you can make a living being yourself? That's not been possible. I mean, think of how many job capabilities there were, the whole situation, and you're programmed as a child growing up. You've got to go to school to get a good job. Well, but if that 2030 thing happens with a large change of unemployment, that's not going to work long term. So some people have advocated guaranteed income. All right? So when we wrote the scenarios, I couldn't figure out how to make it work. One of the purposes of writing a scenario is to find out what you don't know. Not to discuss it. Most scenarios that people give you are discussions of scenarios, not scenarios. It's like confusing if you go to a play and the next day you read in the newspaper the review of the play. The review of the play is not the same thing as the play. Right? Most people confuse the play with the review of the play. They're just discussing assumptions about the future, simply repeating little tape recordings in their brain that they've already had. They didn't do any learning. If you want to have some fun, someone gives you a scenario and says, when you wrote the scenario, what did you learn that you didn't know? That you didn't know you didn't know? And they go, if there's no learning going on, you wasted the idea of a scenario. Scenarios were invented by Herman Kahn at the Rand Corporation to figure out how to prevent World War III. Because we didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't know how to do that. Conventional warfare, we had an idea about. A warfare to blow up the whole world, that's a different deal. So in writing this, it became clear to me that nobody could show, because I've talked to different people around the world, show me a cash flow projection. Money in, money out, money in, money out, cash flow projection, right? Everybody knows if you do a business, you should have a cash flow projection, right? So why wouldn't we do it for a country with guaranteed income? All right? So we went back to the drawing board. Well, what are the various ways? And we stopped writing. You should get to a point in writing a scenario where you don't know something, then stop. Don't make it up, stop. And then find out what's possible. So we did come up with some approaches on how to make this work. But it meant that we had to do a lot of experiments and learn from those experiments and share those experiments, because there are some going on right now. They're in India, one current one in Finland, small number, only 1,000 people, I think. There's been stuff in Namibia. It's pronounced Namibia, not the way Mr. President pronounced it the other day. Anyway, and we should learn from all this and then ease it in, figure out how to do this. But we should prove through a cash flow projection. Like Switzerland. Everybody knows Switzerland had some votes on this, right? Nobody had a cash flow projection. Now, if they stood up and said, here's how to make it work with a cash flow projection, they might have gotten some votes. As best I can tell, you can't make it work right now. The cost of living is too high, and the new income is too low. However, you project this out in the future, and you'll start to see that if we have more robots, making robots, AI, making AI, synthetic biology, making new life form, etc., 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 these are new things to tax. So if all this NT stuff happens, that means your income stream should be going up dramatically. So that's new source. But it doesn't, not right now. But eventually starts to go up. And so that's one curve. The second curve is the cost of living. Right now, the cost of living is still going up a bit. But all these new technologies, what are they doing? They ultimately give you more value at less cost. So you project this out in transportation, in education, in medicine, etc., etc., the costs start to come down. Our wild guess, not a forecast, our wild guess, not a forecast, is that somewhere around 2030, those graphs, this going up and this one coming down, cross over. At this point, the cash flow starts to work. And it looks like it works okay. Which then doesn't mean that everybody just slings back, gets money, and that's it. No, you're giving a baseline so that people are not thrown out in the streets. I mean, we have a social contract that says you behave yourself in school, you get a job, and we give you retirement. All right? Anybody believe that model is going to work 25 years from now? Okay, so we have to change that model. And one of the changes in that model that works in this idea is you give somebody the basic, but not right now, maybe 2025, maybe 2030, different in different countries, different times in different countries, but give a baseline so that you don't have to run to get a job. You take your time. Who am I? What do I want to do in the world? How can I get an AI avatar to learn who I am? You know, Facebook is doing that right now, very elementarily, but it's doing that right now. Project this out in the future. So this AI knows really who you are, and it goes, while you go to sleep, you're sleep snoring away there, late night Spanish dinners, and the next morning you wake up, the little avatar says, I've got 10,000 things you want to do tomorrow, or today. Now, unless I guess wrong, you can't do all 10,000 today. So let's have a conversation and work it out. I have 15 agreed smart contracts. You know, this blockchain stuff can make these smart contracts. Work it out. What? You got 5 minutes. Any further questions? That's all I have to say. You know. Okay, we'll jump ahead. This PowerPoint will be available to people. If you want to make it available to people, they can have this, all right? You'll note that these are different basic assumptions in each scenario. In the it's complicated mixed bag, this sort of a thing we think will happen in all the scenarios. Hands-free, phones-free, laptop-free, AI, human symbiosis run by this little device here. Radio power conversion circuit, display control circuit, telecommunications and power reception antenna, etc., etc., etc. Being tested now. All right? This is not far away. So you very well could be living in a continuous, virtual, augmented, AI-connected world all the time. That also means you're vulnerable to being hacked all the time. So computer security business is not going down. That's one thing that seems to go up. Political turmoil, you got that gridlock I talked about. The environmental stuff gets a mess. Regulations are not being paid attention to. Unemployment explodes around 2030. 2050 is total mess. Financial systems, can't support it, collapse. World order is deteriorated into a combination of nation states, mega corporations, local militias, terrorist groups, and organized crime seems to be the best winner in this scenario. There is your example. People are going to be migrating all over the place in this situation. You got a lot of poor people, of low income, poor people, high youth unemployment, going to the aging societies like Spain. I mean, you talk about the migration you got now. That's just from a couple of countries. The big migrations that are possible would be quite overwhelming. And you have the integration of organized crime, terrorism, corruption, and information warfare in this sort of a scenario. Bad deal. We've got to figure out how to prevent this. Makes democracy an illusion and free markets an illusion. Or we can think about the head of this thing. The government does anticipate the artificial intelligence, conducts extensive research on how to phase it in smoothly, increases intelligence, becomes a goal of education because we've got to get a little smarter. Self-employment is promoted, the idea that you can create a living by connecting yourself to the world. Everybody can do that now, but we don't think that way. 51% of the world is in the center of a world market of 51% of the world. Right? We're all surrounded by 51% of the world, potentially. Now, out of that 51% of the world, how much of the world is interested in paying you 2 cents for something you're interested in doing anyway? Let's say I want to go to a historic place in Spain. I say, hey, I'm going to this historic place in Spain. Who wants to go with me? Click, €2. 55, say yes. Okay, good. That's enough to pay for my lunch at this historic place. Now I want to do something else. Who wants to do that? This is one tiny example of how you can make a living being yourself, self-actualizing. Because remember, Mr. Maslow said if your basic needs are met, eventually you go to self-actualization. Well, if all these next technologies are going to take care of the basic needs, and if you're using social media to pat yourself in the back and make sure your love and belongingness is taken care of, then what's next? Self-actualization. Self-actualization economy makes a logical sense, but you've got to make sure those basics are taken care of in this world. And the arts and media moguls and entertainers help to foster the cultural change from employment culture to self-actualization economy. In my own country, you may remember we had this hippie movement and, freedom, free thinking, and rights for humans, rights for women, rights for different races and so forth. We're going to open up the system. That was through music. Trace it back. It was music. And some people sat down with music writers and said, hey, let's work this out. We may have to do something like this because culture is going to have to shift to do this, because right now we have self-worth by my job from an employer. Right? I am an economist at the university. I am a software engineer for a bank, where I used to be. We're going to have to change the idea of self-worth, self-value. That's culture. And what runs culture? The arts. So the arts is much part of this as the economist. Here's your avatar running around the world, reinventing yourself every day. This is not impossible. You know? For example, no one hired me to do the Millennium Project. There was no job application. Myself and another future said, let's just connect up the world and see what happens. So here we are. And we did it without AI avatars. Now, with AI avatars, it'd be a lot easier. We're going to talk about that. Okay. How many of you have heard about neural lace? Okay, now you're all going to hear about it. Elon Musk is a wise guy that keeps doing things. So don't discount this. This guy's got a history of making things happen. He wants to figure out how you put a lace between the skull and the brain. They're working on it right now. You can do a Google search. You can apply for a job there if you got the background. Now, oh, there he goes. No, stay with what you're doing. Actually, why don't you work for them? Why not? You're qualified. At least check it out. One advantage is you apply for it to see what's going on. This is, a little corporate espionage. Yeah, okay. Now, if we do create augmented geniuses, remember the example of the glasses. If we do create augmented geniuses, here's 2 guys. How much have these guys created in the world? What happens if the idea of being an augmented genius is as common as people with glasses augmenting their eyesight? How much could they create in the world? This is, you can take a look at later, this is my attempt to figure out how we can begin to make a cash flow projection on guaranteed income. I think that the combination of consciousness and technology becoming a continuum joined with artificial intelligence is a smart way to go. And we put it all into a collective intelligence system. We've got these workshops going on. We talked about this earlier at Telefonica today. That's the current status right now. And these suggestions you can take a look at later. But for example, here's one we can do today. The Ministry of Education of Spain could declare tomorrow morning, intelligence is an objective of education. Not to play to Venezuela, but Venezuela was the first country that said intelligence is something that should be part of education. Didn't last long, But it was there for a little while. If we declared intelligence as an objective of education, school teachers and school and university education programs for teachers would start to say, how do you do that? Well, there's a lot of research out there. How many people have ever heard of a cognitive scientist and an elementary school teacher comparing notes? They're not teaching elbows. They're not teaching noses. They're teaching brains. Well, these cognitive science and brain scientists, they're learning how to do that. If you declared increasing intelligence as an objective of education, all of a sudden, these two societies get together. Anyway, here's a bunch of ideas in there that you can take a look at later on. I'm told I got to get off, and that's all I got to say. Thank you. Yeah, oh, okay. Whoop. Let's see, I should have 3 chairs, yes?
Yes.
So go ahead. Yep. Okay. Yep.
So.
Muchas gracias por esta charla, Jerry, y también por ajustarte al tiempo, ¿no? La verdad. Todavía tenemos como media hora aproximadamente para un pequeño debate, un pequeño coloquio contigo, con otro compañero también que se ha sumado a nosotros, pero antes de eso me gustaría hacer unas cuantas observaciones. Lo primero es que me gustaría tener ese avatar a mí también. Eso sería muy útil para mí, muy útil para mi trabajo diario. Sí, yo estoy deseándolo. O sea que lo primero es que este evento que hemos organizado hoy con Jerome es parte de lo que nosotros estamos haciendo y de lo que José María explicó al principio, que es la planificación nacional de talleres que estamos organizando aquí en España dentro del marco de ese proyecto global Millenium, la investigación sobre el futuro del mundo y de la tecnología para 2050. Telefónica, junto con el proyecto Millenium, el nodo español del proyecto Millenium, está promoviendo este proyecto. Esta tarde hemos tenido la
of around 30 experts from different fields, and I think it was a very good beginning. We are having two more okay. Bueno, me dice que igual me pase mejor.
I'm just being told that I should switch to Spanish, but as we were talking English before, I just carried on. Okay, anyway, I was saying that we had this first initial meeting and that we're going to have another couple of workshops in this process of planning and with strategic proposals in November and December, along with a Delphi study with experts, because our ultimate objective is to set up a series of midterm and long-term strategies, which will be our proposal for Spain to be able to face the challenges that Jerome Glenn was talking about globally. The specific challenges we have in Spain and how we can tackle these from the different areas that we're working on in education, technology, companies, culture and society. So all this has to culminate in a report which will be made public at the beginning of 2018, around January, February. And we'll launch it in the Telefonica Foundation, not just to everyone who's come along today, but also we'll be making a public presentation for the press so that we can spread this, publicize this, because it's not just so much a question of drawing up a report, but rather creating a debate in society on the subject. So remember that this project, this event is thanks to many people, this Millenium Project, and also the collaboration of our experts and Jose Luis Cordero, who is here in the front row, who is the head of the node in Venezuela. So, but he's participating here in this process because he's also a Spanish citizen, so he's here in Madrid. So we're very delighted to have him here participating. So, and from this point, what we're going to do now, we have about half an hour. First of all, we will set up a bit of a dialogue with Jerome and the other person here on our panel to be able to open up this debate and look specifically at Spain and make it a public debate on Spain. So our colleague here, our other guest is Sergio Alvarez Teleña. I think his CV was in the presentation of the event, so you know something about him, which it's really quite extensive. But particularly we thought about him because his personal link with this subject. He has been a broker, a very successful broker in the financial system. And from there he's moved on to work in BBVA, the big bank, on big data and managing this huge technological change. And finally, he has become absolutely centered on a professional and personal project, which is, he'll be telling us a bit about this. He has already launched a company project on artificial intelligence. So I think he could be a perfect person to talk to us directly about this subject and what it all means. What will it mean for us as individuals? So he's also young and someone with tremendous vitality. So what we'll do in this first part, I've got some questions, open questions prepared, and then what we'll do is we'll open up to the audience so that everyone who's here today can ask a question. Just start, if you haven't thought about it yet, we'll start thinking about a question for Jerome or for Sergio. And we'll be delighted to have your participation on this subject, which is really so passionately interesting for all of us. So, okay, so I'll go back to English.
Bueno, vamos a cambiar de inglés.
A few questions for you two, and we will start with Jerome. So you were talking about how these three futures could look like in terms of three different scenarios to 2050. So we are talking about artificial intelligence, we are talking about the synergies among all these technologies. We think that this could bring opportunities and threats also, and the Millenium Project wants to give also a positive view. But could you tell us very openly, how do you think we could imagine the workers in 2050? So we, almost all of us work or study in a company, or we own our own company, or we are entrepreneurs. How is this going to change in 2050?
Remember, one of the first things I said of the rule of thumb, whatever you look at in the future is going to be more complex than you think. Right? So anybody watching this videotape in 2050, my apologies, I'm speaking in the present tense language here, but you can still have, in those economic assumptions that I put up very quickly, you still have around 1 billion people, but that's 1 out of every 6 of the workforce, working in the sense that you go to a job, you have a salary, and you have an employer. But that's 1 out of every 6 people, or 1 out of every 3 people in another scenario, but between 1 out of every 6, 1 out of every 3, which means the majority of people in any of these scenarios are not normal salaried people. So there's still some of those, right? But they happen to do a lot of things on the side too. Just like people have their Facebook on the side, they can have all kinds of other income. They'll be buying his avatar and using it for augmenting their activities and so forth. So their jobs will still be salaried but complex. They also may have ad hoc relationships between different companies. Synergetic intelligence may be added to business schools like competitive intelligence. So Telefonica may have multiple corporate relationships, much more complex than they have today. So an employer may be doing a lot of different things in Telefonica compared to today. But that's one category. Then another category, or is what I've talked about, the self-actualization. The people who figure out, and one of the ways you can start on this now, What are your hobbies? What is really interesting? So begin to play around on the internet. So slowly but surely you're building your market. And if you ever do get unemployed in 5, 10, 15 years, you've got your market developed. So you can make a smoother transition to being self-actualization. And there's still going to be some people who will be in bad shape. It's hard to make the whole world work in a short period of time. So there'll still be some workers who are scounging for a living in the informal economy, selling bubble gum in the middle of Nairobi and so forth. It's hard to figure out how you get rid of all that situation. So it would be a complex set of alternatives, would be my view.
Yeah, great answer. I think it's going to be really, really complex. Related to this, one other question for Sergio. We are talking about artificial intelligence many times more in terms of threat than opportunity. We only see the bad side of artificial intelligence. But you, Sergio, you started a new company somehow to do artificial intelligence. So how do you see it as an opportunity? Sergio, tell us a little bit.
Well, first and foremost, I see the danger, and that's how I look for the opportunities. Because if you think of it, when we talk about, and actually I didn't tell you this, we were about to talk about this on top of some beers after the show, but now let's talk. Exactly. So whenever I talk about augmented intelligence, and whenever we talk about augmented intelligence, we think of augmenting humans with machines. That means that we will have some dependency on the machines, and that means that the machines will survive. Then we talk about super intelligence, and that's a bit risky, and we would understand it, that it could be eventually dangerous once they have their own targets, as he mentioned before. So probably we are missing a point where we augment the machines. Why not us augmenting the machines instead of the machines augmenting us? Mm-hmm. And that's my avatar approach they mentioned before. Mm-hmm. All I want is basically us to feel comfortable with all these machines and the quantum improvements and etc., by trying to be able to find those calibrations of the machines with which we are naturally and given our idiosyncrasy, comfortable with. So what I create is an avatar, a robot in the middle between us and the machine, so that it can learn certain dimensions we are keen on, and then keep on calibrating the machine in order to have a new brain for this very robot, so that we can pick the calibration that generates the robot that looks like us the most. So this way, if we manage to inject our knowledge, our judgment into the machine, we will be augmenting the machine. The machine will have dependency on us, and if the machine is better, because we have an avatar that improves it, then we can have a rent from that improvement in the machine. Why did I come up with this weird way of thinking? Because back in 2009, I was working at Morgan Stanley, and we were doing very well. We were quadrupling the P&L already. But then I realized that all I was doing, in this funky environment with all these screens for trading and the software and all that, and we were moving from 10 million to 41 million within a year. And I realized, hey, wait a minute, this is a fourth dimension job. This is not, because we don't live in the three physical dimensions, we now live in four dimensions. The fourth D is for the digital world, when we are pretty active. Actually, we have pretty much half a gigabyte of digital print per day. So I said, oops, I'm making a lot of money for the company. That means the company has to pay me a lot, by the way, and that's good news for today, but probably I'm at risk, because if the job is digital, the company will try to substitute me for a robot in the near future. And we have a say for that. Exactly, we have a say for that in Spanish. Pan para hoy, hambre para mañana. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if José Luis Cordeiro is right, and we're going to see the death of the death, so that mañana could be very long. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So I said, let's jump out of the industry. It's something that no one wanted to do back in 2009, not even today, because the financial industry, the trading industry, is quite good for today's pan. And I came up with this idea at university. I took a PhD in computer science, and this is what I did. And it was selected by you know that from the website, right? It was selected for its impact in the digital economy, etc., etc. And it has several cool things, which is if we create our avatars at work, we won't be strictly substituted by machines, but we can still have a rent coming from them, which is great. B, that's a way of injecting professional judgment into the criteria, and artificial intelligence, let's not forget, that will affect a lot to a very tight generation, those who are professionals right now, i.e. us. So we better have and find ways to get more income for us, because we will be strictly affected and we may not have time to adapt, as you mentioned before. I mean, it's rough, basically. Then
that's why the sooner we start dealing with this and thinking it is, the better off we'll be.
Indeed, and actually this is why I left the industry.
Yeah.
We get on very, very well, and the only reason is because we think very much like the same, right? And even though, actually, I went to the TEDx talk this very weekend, and I said pretty much this slides over here, pretty much, and we didn't talk about it. So, yes, if you have, how would I see myself in the future, for instance, working? I would see myself creating avatars for cybersecurity, for instance. Why not? Because we're trying to do that. For surfing the web in order to find the best discounts. Why wouldn't you have that? What impact would that have in marketing, by the way? Yeah. And we will have to think a lot on how this could change everything, and it could eventually disrupt the whole thing. The only difference is that the avatar I created is to augment the machine instead of the other way around, like Facebook and the rest of the world are doing. That's why we have a very different approach. And last but not least, so if we come up with more examples like Avatar, where we augment the machines, that superintelligence in the end would have no incentives to get rid of us, or at least,
inshallah.
Exactly. Or at least it will be more difficult for them, for the machines, to find reasons why to get rid of us. All right. So the more examples we come up with in augmented machines, the better for us all.
Yes. Thank you, Sergio. We will. They are asking me a little bit that you and me, it's better if we speak in Spanish,
sure,
so that the dialogue is.
That's right.
And that's Jerome has a translation, so he can follow up.
Yep.
But so far we will keep on going a little bit more in this discussion now in English for you, Jerome. Let's bring all this into the education system, because we are saying that for example, with the autonomous car, what will happen with taxi drivers, with bus drivers, with truck drivers? They may go I would say even million of people may go into unemployment. So in our current system, when we go to unemployment, we have some fixed time for cycling, for getting ready for the system again. I mean, in this technological future, this might require more time and a different education system. So not just going to a training course for unemployed people. So how do you see the future education system in this scenario, and especially not as a linear change, just investing a little bit more, but with a disruptive change?
Well, there's a lot to be said about that. Let's start with the little ones. You can do a Google search on the X Prize for Education. The X Prize for Education has got, 800 or so applicants at the moment. And the idea is that they have to create something, not defined what the thing is, that if you left in the middle of a village in rural, non-electric Africa somewhere, or Puerto Rico right now, a lot of electricity going there. And the children of age 3 or so, 4, teach themselves without any instructor in a year and a half the basic reading, writing, and numeracy skills in a year and a half. If you can do that, you win the 10 million or 15 million, whatever is prize. Now, there's already something like 800 teams working on that specifically right now. I suspect somebody's going to figure it out. So, right now, we have people going through elementary school up to 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade to learn how the basic stuff. Well, what happens if that's done when you're 4 years old? Mm-hmm. You save this amount of time to begin with. So that's one exhibit A. Exhibit B, create increasing intelligence as an objective of education, so that the teacher, the environment, the sounds, the music, the sense, the color combinations, the sequence of stimulating the brain is such that it improves brain wiring versus not improving brain wiring, so that then they start to get more intelligent, plus all that basics very fast. Then you start to get the idea of mastering a skill, not learning a skill and getting a B in the class. No, because that means that next year you're walking into that future with 20% you don't know. And then let's say you passed on again, it's another 20% you don't know. By the time you get to college, you're not as smart as you should be, right? So imagine that each child goes at their own speed to master something. And if they don't want to master it, okay, shift. Say, I'm not good at that, I want to shift to some other stuff. But the idea of everybody in lockstep learning at the same time together does not match a complex, diverse future. So master skills rather than learning to take the test, master skills. So that you may be a hotshot in math when you're 5 years old and be terrible at grammar at 5 years old. Then someone else might be quite different. Why should you all be the same? It's not real. So that's, we can go on, but that's enough right now.
Thank you very much. And shortly, Sergio, yendo a tu caso.
So going to your case, Sergio, and thinking about the education system for the future, and thinking a little bit about digital competence. You have a lot of experience in banking and in big companies. How can we transform the business sector, society at large? How can we transform education to be education right through our lives, so that we have this digital skill, these digital competences? How can we do this? If we're thinking about the bank, for example. So what do we have to get up and going? Get up. What steps do we have to take? Well, I think we have to get rid of lots of prejudices. That's very important. We have to think about, for example, are we going to get a degree in maths at university, or are we going to study Google? What about the Google exam? It's probably more important than having a degree in maths in lots of universities, because there are lots of people out there with degrees in maths. It's not made to measure. So universities should be places where you can say, I want to go there to learn these subjects that will be really useful to either get into Google or to wherever I want to, or to make a better motorway, or to whatever. I think a lot of people leave university halfway through because they think, I've got Google now. They're more interested in that. So it's a bit like what you were talking about before. We have a generation that will be much more affected by this, but we don't have this mentality yet. What I did was a bit crazy, but if you follow, you look at my CV, you can see that I've come out of the academic world, gone into industry. I knew I was missing something, so I went back to academia. I resolved this. I learned what I had to learn, and then I left again. So at the end of the day, what I'm doing is doing this as if I were sewing something, to have a more robust machine for the future, as it were. So I think this is what people will be doing a lot more in the future. I think for the future, it'll be difficult for our culture, but I think younger people will have this in their veins, as it were, this mentality. So we need a change of paradigm, of values, and of concepts, no? Yeah, I think everything you have to. It's more a question of you show me what you know, and then we'll see. More than having official qualifications, etc. This is a bit what Jerome talked about. You're reinventing yourself and using your own competence, your skills. Okay, well, let's open up a little bit to the audience. Do you have any questions? Anything you want to discuss? Jose Luis, make sure you have the microphone so that we can translate the question. And please be brief in your questions so that we have more chance to pass them. I'm from Mr. Cordero. I'm from the Millennium Project. I'm the Executive Director of the Latin American Perspective Network. So, one quick question. We're going to do the Alan Turing test for 2029, as my friend said. Are we going to do this before or late or after? 1, 2, and 3. Before.
Yo apostaría a que la prueba se ha pasado de formas distintas en DARFO, en el proyecto de investigación de defensa. Yo creo que DARFO ya lo habrá pasado. Me sorprendería que no lo hubiera pasado. El presupuesto de Estados Unidos para investigación y
National Science Foundation, NIH, National Institute of Health, half of the entire U.S. budget goes to one agency. That's DARPA, the Defense Research and Development Agency. Now, as you probably have guessed, there is a new arms race. It's a brain race between the United States, China, and I don't know how well Russia's doing. But obviously, if you're looking at competitive advantage, passing the Turing test would be one of the benchmarks you would aim at. So I would be surprised if it hasn't been passed and highly classified.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. No, I'm the moderator. I cannot give my opinion. I think teníamos otra pregunta.
We have another question over here, please. Sorry, Jose Luis. Another one over here, and then over on the other side. We've been through that. We've gone through that side where that agency. We've done the test because we're working for that agency. Yeah, as you know. Yeah, no, me encantaría.
Una cosa, ¿sabéis cuál es el año en que DARFO sacó el protocolo para Internet? ¿Sabéis cuál es el año? Fue a finales de los años 60 y no fue hasta los años 90 cuando el mundo empezó a prestarle atención. Así que
look at that spy plane they had in the late 50s. It looks science fiction now. So I figure that if they're not 10 years or more ahead of what we think,
makes sense.
My tax dollars are not working right.
Thank you. A ver, teníamos aquí.
Okay, we had another question over here. Introduce yourself and quick. Okay, I'm a student, Alfonso. I wanted to ask Jerome about the role of these big companies in artificial intelligence and what do they expect from the future?
It's hard to imagine that there won't be a lot of big companies. The size of companies, obviously a lot of companies disappear, they get merged together, we're in acquisitions and all that sort of stuff. So the idea of mega corporations, increasingly large and really increasingly large, I think is pretty inevitable. AI relationship to that? Well, they won't get big if they don't have it. So yeah, I mean, consider the competition of cars years ago. Right? Look at how many different kinds of cars and different kinds of companies and merging companies and breaking up companies and disappearing companies, all that. Imagine that into large-scale corporations of AI becoming extremely more complex. Yeah.
Otra pregunta por aquí.
Another question here, Oscar. Oh, there's a lot of things here that you're talking about. So, a question. You talked fairly quickly at the beginning of your presentation. I think this is a key question that can affect, perhaps more negatively, the rest of the whole proposal, this environmental question you touched on. So with a closed world and limited resources, where if we don't start thinking seriously about growing downwards and in consumption terms, or closing the circle. All the rest of the plans that we may have for a basic income for everyone, robotization, etc., that might come up against a huge lack of resources for the future. So how is this all being studied? How do you see all this?
I had the pleasure of publishing about global warming in 1973. How many people read about global warming before 1973? All right. So take my word for it, I've been paying attention to this for a long time. And the forecasts have almost consistently understated the problem, not overstated the problem. So my attitude is overreact, because we have been under forecasting. That's one. Two, how many of you people know, shouldn't say you, how many people of you know that the animal production industry produces more greenhouse gases than the transportation industry? How many people know that? Okay, now you know all it. Now if you don't believe me, do a Google search and do it right now while I'm talking. That's one thing I love about the new generation. They check you out while you're talking. I love it. Anyway, because then I can go on to the next big thing. If you do a FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization, livestock, greenhouse gas, 2006 study, and you'll see it there. It's a couple of percent bigger. Now, think of how many environmental conferences happen in the world where the main course is meat. Right? Now, we know that we can create from genetic material meat. All right? So we also know we can use the coastlines of the world that are abandoned, not the Riviera, but abandoned poor areas, and we can cut channels in and irrigate with salt water, do saltwater agriculture, so we don't have to worry about droughts. Number one problem of agriculture, droughts. And we can produce algae, which is feedstock for the meat without growing animals. Now those are two ideas, simple ideas. The Millennium Project has been pushing for 20 years. They're making some progress slowly but surely. Secondly, we have to get the CO2 and other greenhouse gases out, because it's over 400 parts per million now. So why in the world would 450 be sustainable? Makes no sense. He says, well, it's politically the answer. Well, nature doesn't give a damn about politics, frankly. You know, you got to talk to nature about this, because she never got the word. All right, so we're going to have to figure out how to create artificial systems, artificial plants, because when people say, well, we'll just plant a lot of trees. Yes, but all that's doing is treading water. If you're going to add another 2 billion people, and they're going to have more income because of all these great ideas, they're going to be consuming more, potentially. However, in comes new technologies. Nanotechnology is more precise, requiring fewer resources per product. Secondly, there's a nanotech, full disclosure, I do own some stock in Hewlett-Packard. Hewlett-Packard has a 3D printer coming out with 60,000 nodules, this tall, this wide, like this, that prints 30 million droplets, voxels a second. You can buy it next year for $150,000. But this industrial capability. What this means, though, goes back. It means the precision of manufacturing, which means less error, which means less repair, and there's fewer resources. Because what I'm trying to say is the efficiencies of making things is going to be extraordinary. Secondly, if we're going to be living in cyberspace, we're going to be consuming cyberspace more than physical space. Right now, I am a good rich person because I have a Cadillac. Right? In the future, you're a rich person because you're interesting. Someone was asking me earlier today about putting together a resume in the future. I'd say you have an app for my virtual reality. So you go into me and find out who I am. It's a completely, what I'm trying to say is that we can solve the problem if we accept the idea of getting stuff out of the atmosphere now, not just stop putting in new stuff, and not simply bioenergy, because that's treading water also. You're taking it out, you're putting it back in. You're putting it out, that's better than nothing. But my attitude is every possible thing you can think of we should do. Everything. Cap and trade, tax carbon, meat without, all of that, do it all. And maybe we'll be okay.
Okay, Jerry, we also have a few more questions. I don't know, only one question, so maybe, I don't know, that there is already a lady, and maybe we can continue afterwards. Jerome will be here. Venga, la última pregunta.
Last question. I'm sorry, we just don't have more time for. My name is Angelica Cabezon. I'm consultant in a consulting agency. After this very complex scenario that you've described, what's going to happen about the skills that, for example, a worker in a corporation who needs to get into self-employment, is this going to be the case? Or what would be the three most different situations that you could imagine there? Briefly, it's rather difficult to say. Well, let's see what I can answer there. I think there'll be a convergence. I think we have to be a lot more creative in our lives, in our companies and outside. Before I think I've gradually created all my own jobs. I've been an intra-entrepreneur, as it were, and I think we can grow more organically and faster outside the company. I have my own startup. We can start up companies that way, bit by bit. So if you combine your work with your startup, and gradually you're doing a bit of everything. So I think we have to be a lot more awake, alert, and a lot more centered on having an impact. And because routine has to be there. We have to think about things that don't have routine, and we have to use our neocortex to develop this, because the boring things can be done by the machines. Okay, so entrepreneurship, a lot of desire, enthusiasm, and flexibility. Those are the three most important factors.
I agree. Since time is short.
Fast.
Yeah. No, I mean, think of how can you make a living being your future dream? All right? Ask yourself that and keep changing your mind as you grow. How can I make, like, my dream is to turn on people to future ideas. Am I dreaming, or am I awake? Am I asleep? Am I asleep somewhere in a hotel? Or is this real? All right? I'm doing that. Most very successful top entrepreneurs will tell you, I followed my passion. I took a risk. Right? Well, we can reduce the risk by a lot of these new technologies and guaranteed income and so forth. But I would center on the idea of who is your dream of yourself? How do you connect so that you can make some kind of living with that? I mean, that's a nice future when you think about it. Imagine 9 billion people being who they want to be. You could be so busy being you, you don't have time to give somebody else a hard time.
Thank you very much, Jerome. Bueno, es una cuestión.
Okay, this is a question we have to reinvent ourselves every day. So thank you to everybody for coming along. Now we have some time for the rest of the questions informally. You can come up and ask questions. So I think we'll close the session now, and a round of applause to our excellent speakers. Thank you very much indeed.